Hey, Internet. So, this episode got away from me a little bit. I was having a hard time focusing. And unfortunately, it's one of those situations where I could re record the episode and then it would go up even later than it already is. I just don't have time, really. So, I'm just plowing forward with the episode. It's not really up to my standards, but then if you've watched the channel for any length of time, you know I have some struggles and things that tend to get in the way and make it hard for me to be like a normal person. So just keep that in mind. Just kept losing train of thought, and it was really hard for me to relay what I was trying to relay. So, especially once we get to the ferals and the bleed sections of this video, there was so much I wanted to say, and I felt like I didn't relay anywhere near what I was trying to relay. But I'm trying not to second guess myself and just hoping it's better than I think it is because I just don't have time. So sorry about that. And yeah, here's the episode. Hello, Internet. Welcome to another episode of the Experimental Cataclysm. If you don't know, this is a show where we talk about the most recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm. This week, there's actually a pretty small number of things that I want to talk about, but there is one or two that's pretty impactful. Before we begin, I want to mention a couple things. Number one, Korg did another dev blog. Hopefully, you are seeing that link up in the right-hand corner, and if not, it will be in the description down below. We've talked about the dev blog before. Korg is one of the development team on Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead, and he talks about some of the things he's been working on. Some of that is bug fixes. Some of that big chunk of that episode was devoted to discussing magicalism things. And yeah, just give it a look, check it out, give him some support. Support the team, all that good stuff. So that's first and foremost. Second, I did skip a PR this week. It added some furniture to the game, specifically scrap furniture, but the PR contained some spoilers for things about an upcoming new faction that's being added to the game, and I just thought, that's going to be a big change, and I thought we should cover that when it happens rather than giving spoilers now and having people ask a lot of questions. So I just didn't include that one, but it added some scrap furniture and other similar things to the game. And then finally, there are some spoilers for this week. Specifically, we'll be talking about the cause of the zombie apocalypse in Cataclysm. So if you don't know what that is and you don't want to know what that is, I would skip. Hopefully in the timestamps, there will be a section listed as ferals, which will be where we discuss that spoiler probably at length. So skip that if you don't want spoilers. Other than that, let's jump into it. First and foremost, we've had more zombie animals coming to the game. Really like this. We've been discussing this over the last month or two. This time we got some zombie horses, zombie cows, and zombie bulls. And I just wanted to point that out. I do like that they're adding more zombie animals. We haven't actually looked at their stats. Why don't we have a look at one of these? Zombie horse. And if we look for its stats, pretty dang fast, pretty average HP. Nothing really super significant. It looks like can deal some pretty decent melee damage, but nothing that's going to be like devastating to you. And yeah, it doesn't seem to have very much armor. Pretty basic as far as a creature goes. Very fast, however. Competing with like Migo speed, I believe, is around 200. So there's that. Let's have a look at the zombie cow as well. These are from Lyle SY, and then Knight added the zombie bull. I like that there's a differentiation between the cow and the bull, just because bulls are like, so I've been around cows and bulls occasionally. Bulls are very, very scary creatures. You do not want to be in a fenced-in area with a very scary, angry bull, and I imagine that zombie bulls also would be sufficiently frightening. We also got zombie deer. I believe they're called zombie, what are they, whites? Yes, woodland white, in a reference to their white-tailed deer, which I guess are, where I live, the dominant species of deer. I don't know if that's true, I guess, in New England as well. So why don't we have a look at their stats as well. Zombie cow. Zombie cow, pretty average speed, definitely significantly more HP than the zombie horse, which I find a bit interesting. Horses are pretty robust as well, although cows are obviously much more dense than horses are. Horses are more muscular. Cows are just larger creatures by a significant margin. Pretty pretty high damage possibilities with their 10-sided die. Other than that, pretty basic. Don't see anything truly exceptional. They have a pretty solid melee skill. Look at the horse, it's only 4 and it's 3d6, whereas this is 2d10. Whatever, not significant enough that it's not comparable. And then the zombie deer, also incredibly fast, also more robust than a horse, which I find odd. Horses are definitely beefier creatures than deer. Deer tend to be pretty frail creatures. Actually, they're not as. I mean, don't get me wrong. A deer can kill you. You know, you hear every couple years about a hunter who goes out, thinks he kills a deer, and then the deer pops up and gores him to death. So, you know, it's not like it doesn't happen. But I am surprised that their HP is higher than the horse. Anyway, let's take a look at the zombie bull, which is the thing I'm most interested in. If we look for the Zombull, 210 HP, which is more or less what I would expect for the cows and things. Especially a bull. Again, they're just so, like, bulls are just so big and frightening. If you've ever been anywhere near a bull, they can be very, very scary. Pretty mundane in regards to the. I mean, they also have a melee skill of 6, and they do 4d6. Is pretty substantial. I kind of thought their armor would be just a smidge higher than that, but yeah, definitely a scary thing. Lots of HP, pretty quick creatures, and I expect that to be kind of the theme for a lot of these larger zombie animals, is that they would have a decent amount of HP, and that they're probably going to be faster than the average human zombie. So, more or less on par what I expect. I would not go near the zombie bull, and it looks like the zombie cow also can be pretty concerning. I guess it depends on your armor and whether you're meleeing them or shooting them. There's a whole thing, you know. But yeah, zombie animals, very cool. Very excited to see more of those added to the game, and I've already seen discussions about other ones. Next, from Leviathan Fiend, I wanted to mention this. We've kind of offhandedly mentioned item length in previous episodes. Just wanted to give another shout out to Leviathan Fiend and anyone else who's working. I just grabbed a random PR about this. There's been quite a few. Anyone who's been working on this, they're fixing the item length. So when item length was added to the game, it seemed like things defaulted to like 3 inches to 5 inches and whatever. And now people are going back and kind of auditing all of those numbers and making them make more sense. Leviathan Fiend has done several of the guns and things, and you're starting to notice that in game, that things are starting to have more appropriate lengths. Just wanted to shout it out because I've been seeing a lot of these PRs and I haven't really paid much attention to them, but it's an example of something that like a new-ish contributor could do. You know, something that if you ever just want to do work for Cataclysm, there's a lot of this little kind of stuff that needs some auditing. You know, I always mention like typos and stuff as pretty basic stuff for new contributors. But here's an example, you know, something new was added to the game and it just needs someone to basically go through a huge list of JSON or JSON. I always say JSON, and people tell me it's not, it's JSON. But it's an example, you just go through, you know, a lot of the dev team, you know, Mark, here we have a picture of Mark. They're busy with code stuff, and so a lot of times these JSON type things, people don't really sit down and go through and check them out and say, okay, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Whatever. So I don't know. It's just one of those things that if you're looking for something new to do, this is an example of something that basically anyone could do with real world information. It's not like you have to make up the numbers and figure it out yourself. It's something where you're taking actual, for example, this one takes firearms, so you can very easily Google the size of this particular firearm and kind of work out what it should be in Cataclysm. So I don't know, I just wanted to mention it, both because I appreciate the work that people are doing, but also because, you know, many hands make light work, and I'd imagine that there are just a crap ton of items in Cataclysm that have not yet had their item length fixed. So yeah, I just wanted to put it out there. Next, from Candleberry, I mostly am putting this in here because I saw some people asking about this on Discord. Someone had recently said, hey, why do labs and other places still have their lights on? And the answer is that it's generally assumed that somewhere in the lab there is a reactor that is functional, which is what keeps the lights on. So this is from Candleberry, adding a reactor map, or a reactor, basically a subsection of the lab that contains a reactor for this particular lab layout. And it looks like this is going to be for an upcoming hub mission, but it's basically really just to flesh out the area. And you know I like things that flesh out the world if you've watched this series for any length of time. And yeah, we had just had a discussion about this on Discord, and I thought I would point it out because that's why labs have lights, if you've ever wondered, is because it's generally assumed that there's at least one functional reactor somewhere. And I like that this particular lab actually got one that is explicitly going to be functional and have an impact on the is why the lights are on. So in fact, that's mentioned right here. Simple reactor room to explain why the lab still has its lights on. Anyway, pretty small change, just wanted to shout it out. Next, from another simulacrum, we have proficiencies that have been added to the game. You can view these in your at menu, the character menu, in the lower right portion underneath where effects are. It will list your current proficiencies. As far as I know, there are no proficiencies that were added as of the time of this changelog that I'm currently working off of. However, in the future, proficiencies will be added to the game. In fact, I think helicopter pilot has been removed. Remove the helicopter pilot trait, migrate it on load to a helicopter pilot proficiency. So it looks like that one is in the game, but I don't believe that there's any other ones. So this is, for example, basically what a proficiency is that instead of working 100% off of our current skill, we can actually gain proficiencies. So for example, instead of just being good at fabrication, having a 9 in your fab skill, let's say, and blacksmithing everything from scratch, instead, you might gradually work up your blacksmithing proficiency so that over time, I'm not really 100% on what this is for necessary. Like, I gotta imagine this is almost explicitly for recipes and crafting. I don't know what other proficiencies they're thinking of in the game, but from what I've seen people discussing, blacksmith is the example that often comes up. And it just is something that's going to impact crafting. As far as I know, I imagine there are other proficiencies that will be added, but at the moment, I'm pretty small-minded. All I can think about is like recipes and crafting specifically. So, you would level up your blacksmithing proficiency or gain blacksmithing proficiency or whatever, which might unlock additional recipes, or maybe it just speeds up your crafting time, things like that. In fact, here we see in conjunction with the recipes proficiencies to determine the time that it takes to craft the item. So that's like the main thing that I can think of. I haven't seen any other examples or things other than the helicopter pilot proficiency, which is a simple do you have it or do you not, for the purposes of helicoptering, I guess. But I thought this was really cool, and I think that as time goes on and more of them are added, in fact, napping is the other one that comes up a lot. People talk about so napping is the act of so back in the day, if you were making like arrowheads and things like that, you would take a stone and you would shape it, and that is napping, as far as I understand, is shaping like a raw piece of stone into the thing that you want. And it's one that people talk about a lot because it's one that would let us functionally make arrowheads or spear tips and things like that. And we have no system of like making that kind of stuff require anything other than base level skills. So having proficiencies connected to that is something that's been suggested multiple times. I don't know yet. It's not really in the game enough for me to have formed an opinion on it. I think that it's cool, and I think that as it gets implemented and more proficiencies are added, this is just going to be a supplemental thing for us to chase down instead of just, oh, let's just grind our skills. Well, there is benefit to, getting proficiencies, starting with proficiencies through the class menu, or profession menu, excuse me, things like that. So I think that in the future, this is going to give more depth to the game, but at the moment, it's pretty limited in its scope. And this, to me, seems like I wouldn't even say bare bones implementation, because I don't think it's bare bones. I think there's some solid stuff here, but I think that it's more of those wait and see kind of PRs where this one is not going to affect the average player in Cataclysm all that much, but in the coming months or whenever they get around to adding more proficiencies, I'd imagine that this is going to affect basically every player in the game, and it's going to be something that I never know what to say. I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be cool, but I don't think there's enough here for the average person to really form a solid opinion on it. So take that for what you will. Link will be in the description down below. There is like a lot of like stuff here if you want to read it yourself and actually flip through what has been changed. It's pretty significant in that it's going to have an impact in the future, but at the moment is pretty limited in its scope. So whatever. I hope that all made sense. I'm feeling a little off today, but I feel off every day, so who knows? Let's just move on. And we're going to the spoiler section, so hey, if you don't want to hear spoilers on what causes this zombie apocalypse, this is another warning for you to check out. Next, for mail clips, we have feral humans blob psychosis. So I'm not going to give you like a huge explanation of what causes zombies in Cataclysm, but the TLDR is that there's something called the blob. The blob is in basically everything on the planet at this point. To my understanding, lore-wise, it got into the water and is like everywhere now. This includes humans being infected, including your player character. So the blob does a lot of really interesting things, and part of the reason why we, for example, as survivors, we heal so quickly is because we are impacted by the blob, which aids in our regenerative abilities. So it's always been kind of, I don't know, I heard Kevin talking about this several months ago about wanting this to be implemented, but the idea is that there are human beings who have been infected with the blob, and at this point they are... So, okay, this is one that I had people talk to me on Discord to try and explain the lore behind it. I had a little bit of difficulty grasping it. Basically, feral humans are not attacked by zombies. They are viewed as the same as zombies. They're infected humans who have a high, like, I don't want to say toxicity, but like a high amount of blob in their systems. They can still do a lot of human things, like possibly use tools and weapons rather than just being a mindless zombie that comes at you and tries to bite your face. And yeah, they could even maybe pass as humans, because during the initial Cataclysm there were people who had this blob psychosis that people didn't really recognize that they were zombies because they weren't really zombies. They were very human in appearance and possibly even in demeanor depending on the level of their blob psychosis. It's a whole thing. But this PR basically adds humanoid ferals to the game. It renames the feral runners, feral predators, feral hunters, I think are the three that were previously named feral. Those have been renamed as zombies. I think that's in here somewhere. They've been renamed to zombie runner, zombie hunter, and zombie predator. And then these ferals have been implemented to the game. Now, they butcher as human, which is interesting. And it adjusted the cannibal trait. But basically these guys, when you find them, they will throw things at you. Seems to be the main implementation at the moment. They'll throw stones at you, rocks at you, bricks at you, that sort of thing. And they're just interesting. I don't... Thrown rock, for example, they have the ability to throw rock. And here we have some that have pipes and crowbars and things of that nature. And I find it hard to explain the lore behind it because I'm not particularly well versed in the lore of Cataclysm. But essentially, this adds multiple monsters to the game that you'll see popping up. I've already seen multiple of them in my most recent Let's Play. They are humanoid in appearance. They don't really look necessarily like a far gone zombie that you would see, especially later in the Cataclysm. They're not like the more mutated or scary monsters that are in the game. They're very people-ish. And again, because of that, they can use tools, including weapons. We have the pipe, crowbar, and axe ones that have been added specifically to the game. They will throw rocks at you. If I can look at their stats here somewhere, we'll see about their speed and health. We should at least mention that. Pretty standard HP, pretty standard speed, nothing really exceptional. They don't seem to have any armor. They're just people that are really infected and aren't quite zombies yet. I don't know. I thought before I started this episode, I thought I had written down all the lore somewhere, and I did not. And I'm a little confused about their exact background, but all you really need to know is that there are new monsters added to the game. They're going to come at you with pipes, crowbars, etc., and they're going to throw rocks at you when they're out of range. I don't know where this is going exactly. I feel like there's a huge amount of expansion that can be done with these feral type creatures. I don't really know what that direction is, but the links will be in the description down below. Maybe you can look it up yourself, ask people what the lore is, things like that. I thought I would. Honestly, I'm disappointed in my explanation. I thought I'd written everything down, and I didn't. So let's just move on. I feel bad now. Let's just move on. Next, from Ungen or Ungen, I don't know. We have size-based mutations that modify our max stomach capacity. Now, normally I wouldn't even mention something like this, pretty minor, but I just thought this was really neat. Basically, the bigger you are, the larger that effect it will have on your stomach. If you get the small size mutations, you're going to have a smaller stomach. And this person on Discord had mentioned that basically they were a very large mutant, and they were kind of annoyed that their stomach capacity wasn't larger, even though they had higher metabolism that required them to eat more food. So basically their calorie consumption went up, but their actual stomach capacity did not, making it much harder to actually consume the number of calories that are required. I thought that was really interesting. So I thought I would give the code a shout out, or the PR a shout out. I also think this is one of their first or only contributions. So, yeah, hey, good job. Thanks for contributing. And, yeah, I just think this was a neat little change. Pretty minor, I guess. Probably should have been at the top of the show, but what are you going to do? So, yeah, if you're a large mutant, you're going to have more stomach capacity. Let's move on. I'm starting to feel bad after that whole feral thing. Let's just power through the rest of the episode. And then finally, and this is pretty significant as well, we have a blood overhaul. We've talked before about how they're planning to rework the wounding type system in Cataclysm, making things like self-surgery probably isn't the right word, but like minor self-surgery. They want to expand the way that we treat our wounds and heal our characters, things like that. And this was part of that, because blood, of course, is a huge part of, well, human existence. When you're getting medical treatment, it's kind of a big deal. So this is a relatively huge PR that affects a lot of things. You'll see quite a lot has been addressed here. I would encourage you to look at the PR yourself. Again, in the description down below, there will be a link to this PR. It's pretty dang hefty, but I'm going to try to give you like the gist of it. Essentially, you now have blood. Previously, even though we would have the bleed effect, there was no blood like limitation. There was no internal reservoir of blood. You just could bleed as much as you want as long as you had HP. It wasn't a big deal. Now, instead of draining your HP the way it would previously, blood, if you get a bleeding wound, you're actually depleting a hidden resource that exists in your body. So you have a finite amount of blood in your system, and bleeding will sap that blood. In fact, it's not just blood. It was blood and red cells. So you have these two new reservoirs in your character that you're not really aware of how much you have. And then when you get a bleeding wound, you will slowly deplete these things. Obviously, large, significant bleeding wounds are more significant than, minor bleeding wounds. There is a difference in intensity. There are multiple stages of blood loss. So I think the first one is minor bleeding, small scratches to arterial hemorrhages. I have not gotten the highest tier bleeding wound yet, which is some kind of arterial, I don't know if it's called hemorrhages, but it's something heavy arterial flow or something like that. So there are different levels to how much you're bleeding. The smallest bleeding wounds will go away by themselves over the course of, honestly, I found that if I just rest to regain my stamina, most of the time the really minor bleeding will go away on its own. However, more significant bleeding wounds need to be treated, and pretty quickly, depending on the significance of the blood loss. So, basically what this means for the average player is that you're going to notice your character bleeding a lot more frequently. However, most bleeding wounds you get are very minor, and then if you get significant bleeding wounds, you should probably treat them as quickly as humanly possible. I've not bled to death in game yet, so I don't know what that experience is like. I've heard people talking about losing consciousness from blood loss. I didn't know we had that in the game. I don't know if that's actually true. Previously, when I died of smoke and heat. When I died of heat in the game, I was near a fire and I just laid on the ground basically. I didn't lose consciousness or control of the character. I just couldn't do anything. It would say you fell down and then you couldn't stand back up basically. I imagine it's similar for bleeding. There is hypovolemic shock, which is the loss of blood, and you can die from blood loss. So pretty much just apply common sense to it. What I found personally is that basically every single combat encounter now inflicts the most minor bleeding wounds. And I find it really annoying and tedious to constantly treat them. You don't have to treat those minor bleeding wounds, but I don't like the idea of my character bleeding everywhere. So for instance, at work, I often cut myself, nick myself while I'm trying to work. I always apply bandages, just because, I mean, I guess technically I don't want to bleed on the product, but also because I don't like the idea of having a bleeding wound. So every time my character gets injured in Cataclysm, I'm constantly treating myself, even though I could just let them kind of bleed themselves out, so to speak, and go away on their own. And so what this change has added for me is a lot of tedium, because every time I get a bleeding wound, I have to bandage a bleeding wound. So I have to make more bandages, I have to apply more bandages. It's a lot of key presses at the end of the day. Ultimately, I really like the new system because it's going to add the ability, like, so this is like foundational to more of that wound treatment system that I was talking about before. This is going to open the door to things like blood transfusions, more bleeding implements in the game, so like things that, or bleed treatments in the game. So it's going to add more things, I think, ultimately that help you stop blood loss. Dressings here, it specifically references adhesive bandages, so I don't know if they were in the game before. I can't really remember seeing them, but they are now, and they're good for that very minor bleeding that I was talking about. And then there are things like tourniquets and stuff that I think would be really cool that all gets added to the game. We already had like hemostatic powder, quick clot, whatever. That kind of stuff, it can be expanded on even more now because bleeding has been added to the game. This is the foundation for treating many significant like surgery type situations. Obviously, you're going to need blood transfusions. You're going to need to manage your blood. I imagine that as you start to bleed out, you're going to get messages talking about being woozy and things like that, which is, of course, more realistic. So for me, I really like this because I can see that this is going to evolve over time into a more robust medical treatment system. I think for a lot of people who don't see that, people are getting frustrated. I, again, am mildly annoyed by constantly having to bandage, but I've seen some people who are like really aggressively negative about it, like this is ridiculous. I don't know that there's anything wrong with it. It's just annoying. So in my most recent Let's Play, I took a few bullets from a turret, and of course that led to bleeding wounds. And I'm not upset that it led to bleeding wounds. It makes perfect sense. I took a couple bullets. That would cause me to bleed. What was annoying is that from those, I don't know how many bullets I took, but I ended up with 2 significant bleeding wounds and a minor bleeding wound. And in order to stop all that bleeding, it took me 8 bandages. And I was just like, it makes sense that I'm bleeding. It makes sense that I need to treat it. But just applying 8 bandages one after another is tedious and unpleasant. So I do understand why people are complaining about it. But I think ultimately this leads to like a lot. This opens up so much stuff. And I don't see why people are super complaining about it. I have heard a lot of people talking about zombies bleeding to death in front of them, so I guess currently zombies are bleeding, and that's something that you can maybe take advantage of, but I don't think that bleeding in general is a reliable way to kill your opponents. I think it's an odd thing to do. Like I wouldn't pick up the old, cat of nine tails just yet. You want probably to stick with the way things have been, even if enemies do bleed. I don't think that that's a reliable thing to exploit. Other than that, I mean, there's so much here. I just don't know what to say about it other than I think it's cool, and I think that the minor treatments is a bit annoying. But I don't know. I think that's just something we're going to get used to over time. Again, I've seen a lot of people complaining about it. I don't really get that. I don't think that it's complain worthy. I think that it's a minor annoyance at worst. So just give it a chance if you haven't already. I don't think it's a big deal at all. Start carrying more bandages on your person. Makeshift bandages are very easy to make, including boiled makeshift bandages, and just treat your wounds. I think the people who are complaining are the people who think that they should be a tank in the apocalypse, who should just be impervious to this kind of stuff. I don't like that at all. I believe you should have to treat your wounds, especially bleeding wounds. The only other thing I would mention is that currently, like, literally every single combat encounter leads to me bleeding. I don't know if that's like my own bias and I'm wrong about that, but it really does seem like 100% of the time, even if I'm wearing chitin and steel arm guards and what I would consider like mid to high tier armor, I still end up bleeding at least once per combat, and it I guess makes sense. But again, it is pretty annoying to constantly be bandaging your wounds. I guess maybe that's just the way things are going to be now. I don't know. Maybe it gets dialed in a little bit more in the future. I don't really know what to say about it, but it definitely happened. And I think that you're going to notice it if you start playing now. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think, again, it's less about this PR and more about the things to come. This PR is pretty cool and does some cool stuff and adds a lot of things. But I'm more excited personally for seeing the future of self-treatment in the game. And yeah, just bear it out. I know, again, some people are very frustrated. Just play with it because I think it's going to go somewhere really cool in the future. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's going to do it for this episode. Not feeling super confident now. Feel like I left. Doesn't matter. Okay, so thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. And I'll be back in a couple weeks where we'll talk about some new things that have come to the game. And yeah, that's going to do it. So thanks for watching. See you next time.